Nurse Xiomara Reyes moved through the elite Olympus Medical ER like a ghost, efficient but invisible, another rookie among titans. Her unassuming demeanor hid a quiet intensity, an observant gaze that missed nothing. The calm, however, shattered with the screech of an ambulance, announcing the arrival of 7-year-old Kai Hansen. Kai, a small boy whose eyes were already dimming, lay catastrophically wounded. A single gunshot had ripped through his chest, a cruel, precise strike. Panic pulsed through the trauma bay as Dr. Sarkisian, chief of surgery, surveyed the scans. "The bullet is millimeters from his heart," he declared, his voice tight with grim authority. "Any standard extraction, too great a risk of rupture. It's an impossible situation." Despair settled, thick and suffocating. The parents' cries were heart-wrenching. The very air vibrated with the fear of a life slipping away, a problem no one here could solve. But in the quiet hum of the machines, Xiomara felt a flicker of memory, a desperate, unconventional solution stirring in her mind, a whisper of hope only she could hear. The hushed urgency of the Olympus Medical Center was a different beast from the makeshift clinic Xiomara knew. Here, gleaming chrome and hushed footsteps masked a ruthless ambition, a relentless pursuit of prestige. Doctors moved with a practiced confidence, their white coats crisp, their titles worn like armor. Xiomara, her scrubs slightly rumpled, felt every inch the rookie, the quiet shadow amidst a constellation of stars. Her earlier flicker of a memory, that unconventional solution, remained a fragile whisper, easily drowned out by the authoritative pronouncements echoing through Kai's critical care bay. Dr. Armen Sarkisian, chief of surgery, stood sentinel beside the boy's bed, his face a mask of controlled frustration. His gaze, usually sharp and penetrating, was now narrowed, dissecting the monitors, the scans, anything but the agonizing problem at hand. "The bullet is stable, for now," he declared to the assembled team, his voice tight, "but its proximity to the ventricular wall makes any direct approach suicidal. We risk catastrophic rupture." His words hung heavy, a death knell in the sterile air. Around him, a cadre of specialists nodded grimly, their expensive educations and years of experience offering no immediate solutions. Among them, Dr. Thandiwe Moyo, a senior resident whose ambition gleamed in her eyes as brightly as her perfectly coiffed hair, offered a technical, by-the-book assessment. "Perhaps a phased approach, Dr. Sarkisian. Stabilize the bleed, then consider percutaneous access through the ventricular apex, though the risk of creating a new defect." She trailed off, her proposed solution dissolving into its own inherent dangers. Her eyes flicked towards Xiomara, who stood a little apart, observing Kai with an intense, almost familiar focus. Moyo's lip curled almost imperceptibly, a silent question: what could a rookie nurse possibly contribute here? Xiomara's gaze, however, wasn't on the monitors. It was on Kai himself, on the subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in his chest, a barely visible rise and fall that seemed just a beat too shallow. She noticed the slight pallor that hadn't been there moments ago, a faint dampness on his brow. Her instincts, honed in chaotic fields where high-tech diagnostics were a luxury, screamed a warning. This wasn't stable. It was a precipice. She took a tentative step forward, her voice a soft murmur against the low hum of machines. "Dr. Sarkisian," she began, her heart pounding a desperate rhythm against her ribs. "The arterial pressure, it seems to be fluctuating more than indicated. And the boy's color." Sarkisian cut her off with a dismissive flick of his wrist, not even turning his head. "Nurse Reyes, we are monitoring all vital signs comprehensively. Stick to your assigned tasks. The surgical team is discussing the complex nuances of cardiac trauma." His tone was polite but edged with a chilling finality, a clear reminder of her place in Olympus's rigid hierarchy. Dr. Moyo, catching his eye, offered a faint, knowing smile, a subtle agreement to the chief's rebuke. Xiomara felt a flush of humiliation creep up her neck. She retreated, her observation dismissed, her concerns unheard. The tension in the room, however, did not dissipate, it only coiled tighter, a spring about to snap. The fear for Kai, the agonizing lack of options, was a palpable weight. And as the minutes stretched, the boy's subtle decline continued, a silent alarm only Xiomara seemed to be hearing. The whisper of her unconventional solution grew louder, a desperate plea for attention. The air in the operating theater thickened, heavy with unspoken dread. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of Kai's heart monitor, once a steady presence, now felt like a countdown. Xiomara watched, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. Kai's lips, already pale, seemed to acquire a faint bluish tinge. His breathing, previously labored, was growing shallower, quicker, a desperate flutter against an invisible current. The lines of pain and concentration etched on the doctor's faces deepened with each passing second, reflecting the boy's silent struggle. "His saturation is dropping again," Dr. Moyo murmured, her voice tight, pointing to a screen. "And the pressure, it's trending down." Sarkisian, usually so composed, raked a hand through his hair, his earlier irritation morphing into a raw edge of frustration. "We're still debating microstents versus a direct incision, Thandiwe. Both carry unacceptable risks given the bullet's proximity to the ventricular wall." He glanced at the angiogram, projected starkly on a large screen, showing the bullet a hair's breadth from a catastrophic rupture point. It truly was a death trap. Xiomara's gaze flickered between the monitor and Kai's small, vulnerable body. She saw what they couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge, the subtle tremor in his extremities, the clammy sheen on his forehead, the way his chest seemed to struggle for air, even with the ventilator assisting. These weren't just numbers on a screen, they were the body's last, desperate signals. The slow bleed was accelerating, the cardiac tamponade tightening its grip. He wasn't just unstable, he was actively decompensating, slipping away minute by agonizing minute. Her mind raced, cycling through her memories of makeshift clinics, of desperate improvisation under impossible circumstances. The solution, unconventional and risky, pulsed behind her eyes. It was a whisper from a war-torn past, now screaming for attention. Every standard procedure discussed in this opulent theater seemed an elaborate, deadly dance around the obvious. They were stuck in a loop of protocol, while a child died. "Dr. Sarkisian," Xiomara began, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. The chief of surgery didn't respond, his focus still locked on the screens, debating minutiae with Dr. Moyo. "Dr. Sarkisian, with respect, Kai is crashing. His cardiac output is falling." Sarkisian finally tore his gaze from the monitors, turning slowly towards her, his expression a storm gathering on the horizon. "Nurse Reyes, I believe I made myself clear. We are well aware of the patient's condition. Your observations are unnecessary." "No, sir, they are not," Xiomara pushed on, adrenaline overriding her fear. "His color is off, he's diaphoretic, his pupils are dilating. He needs intervention now. And the standard approaches, respectfully, are taking too long and are too risky given the current state of the ventricle." Dr. Moyo shot Xiomara a look of bewildered exasperation. "Nurse, we are talking about intricate cardiac surgery. This is not a conversation for—" "I've seen a similar situation before," Xiomara interrupted, her gaze pleading with Sarkisian, her voice rising with a desperate urgency. "In a field hospital, with far less equipment. We used a non-surgical, percutaneous approach. A specialized, very fine cannula, guided under real-time imaging, to extract the object. It's less invasive, creates less trauma, and is precise enough to avoid a rupture." Silence descended, heavier than the operating lamp. Sarkisian's face went from frustrated to a terrifying, controlled fury. His eyes, usually cool and analytical, now burned with outrage. He took 2 slow, deliberate steps towards her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, yet carrying across the entire room. "Did I just hear a rookie nurse, Nurse Reyes, propose a surgical procedure, contravening established Olympus medical protocols and undermining the expertise of a world-class surgical team. His words were laced with ice, each one a hammer blow. Are you suggesting that a chief of surgery, a senior resident, and an entire support staff are somehow missing a trick that you, with your field hospital experience, have divined? Xiomara felt the flush of humiliation creep up her neck again, but she met his gaze head-on. Kai's shallow breaths were a searing reminder of the stakes. Sir, I am suggesting an alternative that is less traumatic and has a higher chance of success given the present circumstances. It requires a very steady hand, absolute precision, and specific tools, yes, but it avoids opening the chest completely and directly manipulating the heart wall. Sarkisian's jaw worked, his face darkening. This is insubordination of the highest order. This is a gross breach of protocol. You are a nurse, Nurse Reyes, not a surgeon. Your job is to follow orders, not issue directives or suggest alternatives to attending physicians, especially not to me. He paused, breathing heavily, his voice rising in volume, echoing off the sterile walls. I cannot tolerate this kind of rogue behavior, this arrogant disregard for chain of command, in my operating room, especially when lives are on the line. I'm afraid, Nurse Reyes, your services are no longer required at Olympus Medical. You're fired. Effective immediately. Get out. The words hung in the air, cold and definitive. Xiomara felt a wave of dizzying disbelief, followed by a searing pain of public humiliation. Dr. Moyo looked away, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The other nurses and technicians were frozen, eyes wide with shock. Yet, through it all, Xiomara's gaze remained fixed on Kai's small, struggling form. He was dying. And she, the one person who saw a path, had just been cast out. The terror for Kai, the agonizing lack of options, now felt like a crushing certainty. Xiomara just faced public humiliation, fired for daring to see a different path when everyone else saw none. Haven't we all, at some point, felt overlooked or dismissed, despite knowing we had something unique to offer? If you're rooting for the underdog, for those quiet voices that deserve to be heard, then you're already part of our community. Don't miss what happens next to Kai and Xiomara. We invite you to hit that subscribe button, join our growing global community of story lovers, and help us continue bringing you more thrilling, heartfelt narratives just like this one. Your support empowers us to craft better stories for all of us. Thank you for being here. The chill of the Olympus Medical parking lot offered no solace. Xiomara Reyes leaned against her modest sedan, the metallic taste of humiliation still sharp on her tongue. Her dismissal, so public and brutal, echoed in her mind, each word a fresh cut. Rogue behavior, arrogant disregard, fired. She'd been an outcast before, in other places, but never like this, never when a child's life hung by a thread she alone knew how to mend. The image of Kai, pale and fragile, flickered behind her eyelids, a ghost of a boy slowly fading. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to fight, but the doors of Olympus, symbol of elite medicine, felt permanently shut to her. Her phone buzzed, startling her. Dr. Moyo's name flashed on the screen. Xiomara hesitated, her finger hovering. What now? More lectures. More dismissal. But then, Moyo's voice, usually crisp and controlled, was frantic. Xiomara. He's crashing. Kai, he's going into full cardiac arrest. We've tried everything. Nothing's working. Sarkisian, he needs you. Please. The plea, raw and desperate, cut through Xiomara's anger and hurt. He's crashing. The words were a jolt of ice and fire. All thought of personal slight vanished, replaced by the terrifying vision of Kai's failing heart. Her own heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of panic. Could she go back? To the place where she had just been publicly shamed. To the very man who had dismissed her expertise as a rogue. Fear, cold and insidious, wrapped around her. Fear of further failure, of confirming Sarkisian's harsh judgment, of the immense pressure, of the life-or-death stakes. But then, another image rose, clearer and stronger than any fear, Kai's small, trusting face from earlier, his parents' tear-streaked eyes. And memories, sharp as shrapnel, of a dusty, makeshift clinic in a war-torn land, where the only protocol was to save a life, no matter the cost, no matter the means. Where she had learned to improvise, to feel, to trust her hands when machines failed. This wasn't about Olympus, or Sarkisian, or her pride. This was about Kai. A different kind of fire ignited in her, a stubborn, quiet courage that had seen her through far worse. It wasn't bravado, but a profound, empathetic resolve. I will not let him die if there is a chance. She didn't run, but she moved with a swift, purposeful stride back towards the gleaming glass doors of Olympus. The fluorescent lights inside felt harsher now, the hushed corridors amplifying the frantic energy she sensed coming from the ore. The weight of her unique skill, once a hidden shame, now felt like an urgent, sacred duty. This was a transformation, not of outward appearance, but of internal conviction. The quiet, overlooked rookie nurse was gone. In her place was someone who had stared down death in its rawest forms and knew when to break the rules to save a life. Pushing through the heavy ore doors, the scene was chaos distilled. The monitors screamed their ominous warnings. Doctors and nurses moved with a desperate, futile urgency. Dr. Sarkisian stood by Kai's bedside, his usual towering presence shrunken, his face ashen. He wasn't barking orders, he was staring blankly, defeat etched into every line of his face. He looked up as Xiomara entered, and their eyes met across the frenetic room. There were no words, none needed. In his gaze, Xiomara saw it all, the crushed arrogance, the searing shame, the abject fear, and, most profoundly, a desperate, silent plea. It was his apology, clearer than any shouted word. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his own failure pressing him down. He didn't order her back, he merely looked at her, a broken man offering a life into her hands. The fear was still there, a cold knot in Xiomara's stomach, but it was eclipsed by a fierce wave of determination. This was the turning point. This was her moment of choice, to cling to the hurt and walk away, or to step into the fire. She looked at Kai, his small chest barely rising, his life ebbing away. Every personal slight, every doubt, every internal tremor vanished. "Give me the tools," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the din. She didn't ask permission. She took command. Her gaze swept over the sterile instruments, quickly identifying what she needed. She moved with an innate grace, a quiet authority blooming from her core. Dr. Moyo, relief flooding her face, nodded and began to clear the space around Kai. Sarkisian simply stepped back, giving her room, a silent acknowledgement that the hierarchy he had so fiercely protected had just shattered, yielding to a truth far more potent, genuine expertise, honed in crisis, transcending all titles and protocols, was all that mattered now. Xiomara was no longer a fired nurse, she was Kai's last hope. And she was ready. The air in the operating theater, thick with dread just moments before, now thrummed with a different kind of intensity, a profound, almost reverent silence. Xiomara didn't waste a second. Her gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept the instrument trays. A fine-gauge catheter, a specific type of forceps with a very smooth, rounded tip, and the high-resolution ultrasound, angled precisely, if you please. Her requests were precise, unusual, far removed from the blunt force and broad strokes of traditional open-heart surgery. A junior resident fumbled, unsure, but Dr. Moyo, her face a mask of concentrated purpose, was already handing Xiomara the requested items, anticipating her needs with an instinctual understanding that transcended their previous animosity. Dr. Sarkisian stood frozen, a statue carved from pride and disbelief. He watched, utterly incapable of intervention, as Xiomara, with an almost ritualistic care, began to prepare her non-standard tools. She didn't don heavy gloves, instead requesting the thinnest available, her movements economical, every gesture conveying an absolute certainty. She affixed a tiny, almost imperceptible loop of surgical wire to the end of the catheter, then tested its flexibility, its tensile strength, with the same delicate touch one might use to thread an invisible needle. This wasn't surgery as Olympus Medical knew it. This was something else entirely, something ancient, something honed in deprivation, now blossoming in a temple of modern medicine. The overhead lights cast long, stark shadows. Kai's small, pale body lay vulnerable on the table, the rhythmic beep-beep-beep of the cardiac monitor the only sound breaking the oppressive stillness. Xiomara leaned in, her body language radiating a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. She didn't look at Sarkisian or Moyo, her focus absolute, a universe contracting to the fragile expanse of Kai's chest. With an almost imperceptible movement, guided by the live ultrasound image projected onto a nearby screen, Xiomara inserted the modified catheter. There was no grand incision, no tearing of tissue. Just a tiny, calculated entry point, made with a scalpel that seemed to disappear into her skilled hand. Sarkisian's breath hitched. His eyes, usually imperious, were wide with a mix of horror and a burgeoning, reluctant awe. He watched the screen, seeing the fine line of the catheter, an almost invisible thread, snaking its way through Kai's delicate vasculature, a breathtaking millimeter by excruciating millimeter, toward the dark, ominous silhouette of the bullet. The tension in the room coiled tighter with each passing second. Every person present held their breath, their own heartbeats synchronizing with the frantic urgency of Kai's on the monitor. Dr. Moyo unconsciously leaned forward, her jaw clenched, her gaze fixed, utterly mesmerized. She had seen countless operations, observed the titans of surgery at work, but never anything like this. This was artistry, a macabre ballet danced on the edge of life and death, performed with an impossible blend of brute courage and gossamer delicacy. Xiomara's hand, steady as stone, did not tremble. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a fine sheen of sweat beading on her upper lip, but her eyes, when they occasionally flickered to the ultrasound, held an intense, almost preternatural calm. She was not just seeing the image, she was feeling it, navigating the microscopic landscape of Kai's internal organs with an intuition that defied anatomical diagrams. The wire loop, now visible on the screen, hovered terrifyingly close to the bullet, a dark, jagged shard of metal nestled against the vital musculature of the heart itself. One wrong move, one tremor, and everything would be lost. Sarkisian felt a cold dread claw at his stomach. This was a gamble beyond anything he'd ever conceived. His entire career had been built on control, on predictability, on the absolute adherence to established, peer-reviewed methods. Yet here, a rookie nurse, fired for insubordination, was attempting a procedure so audacious, so unorthodox, it defied every tenet he held sacred. And the terrifying part. It looked like it might actually work. A flicker of something akin to jealousy mixed with a profound sense of inadequacy twisted in his gut. This was a truth too immense to ignore, his way had failed. Her way, however impossible, was the only one left. The silence stretched, unbearable, as Xiomara's gentle touch, guided by her unmatched expertise, began its critical, delicate dance around the bullet. The room waited, suspended on a single, silent prayer. The room waited, suspended on a single, silent prayer. Xiomara's breath was so shallow, so perfectly controlled, it barely disturbed the air. Her eyes, magnified by the surgical loops, were locked on the shimmering curve of metal, her hands an extension of her will, moving with a supernatural grace. The thin, custom-bent probe, her only weapon, glided not through muscle or sinew, but through the terrifyingly narrow gap of an unspoken promise. She felt the infinitesimal shift, a resistance that was not obstruction, but an invitation. This was it. The final, perilous act. With a whisper of movement, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, Xiomara rotated her wrist. There was no fanfare, no dramatic flourish. Just a tiny, almost inaudible click, the sound of metal disengaging from flesh. Time seemed to lurch forward, then stop. The bullet, dull and dark, detached itself. For a fraction of a second, it hung there, suspended in the space she had carved, a dark, malevolent seed now orphaned from its destructive purpose. Then, with the utmost care, she began to retract the probe, the bullet held securely within its embrace. A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the ore, a sound like a single, massive gasp from every lung in the room. Dr. Moyo's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, glistening with an emotion that was a potent cocktail of disbelief, awe, and a nascent, terrifying hope. Dr. Sarkisian, who hadn't dared to blink, felt a tremor run through his entire body. He watched, utterly mesmerized, as the bullet emerged, a silent, stark testament to the impossible. "It's out," Xiomara stated, her voice a calm, steady counterpoint to the tumult of the room, as she gently placed the tiny, lethal projectile into a sterile basin. The sound of it hitting the metal was shockingly loud in the silence. Immediately, the anesthesiologist's voice cut through the stunned quiet, urgent and disbelieving, pressure stabilizing. "Heart rate, it's regulating. Sinus rhythm, strong. Oh my God, it's working." The monitor, which had been painting a desperate landscape of erratic peaks and valleys, now began to hum a steady, rhythmic tune. The frantic red lines softened into reassuring green waves. Kai's pale, almost translucent skin seemed to regain a fraction of its natural warmth. The barely perceptible flutter in his chest, so close to stopping moments before, now pulsed with a fragile but growing strength. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over the operating theater, a palpable force that seemed to physically push down on shoulders and loosen clenched jaws. The tension that had held every person captive, a rigid, suffocating shroud, suddenly dissolved into thin air. Shoulders slumped, faces softened, and breaths that had been held for an eternity finally escaped in long, shuddering exhales. It wasn't just professional success, it was a deeply human victory snatched from the jaws of absolute despair. Sarkisian felt it most acutely. The cold knot of dread that had been twisting his gut for hours, the bitter tang of defeat, the searing shame of his own arrogance, all of it melted away. In its place bloomed a sensation so powerful, so utterly humbling, it brought an unexpected prickle to his eyes. He looked at Xiomara, who was now meticulously securing Kai's chest, her movements still precise, but tinged with the quiet exhaustion of a battle won. Her head was bowed slightly, her expression unreadable, but radiating a quiet, profound competence. The brilliant surgeon, the chief of surgery, felt a raw, unvarnished awe that transcended his professional pride. His way had failed. And her way, the impossible, rogue way, had saved a child. Dr. Moyo, too, was transformed. Her initial dismissiveness, her professional ambition, all evaporated in the face of such raw, undeniable genius. She saw not a rookie nurse, but a master craftswoman, an artist of life and death, who had painted a miracle with her bare hands. A genuine, unbidden smile touched her lips, mingled with a tear that escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. It felt right. The air in the ore, once thick with unspoken fear, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a quiet, almost reverent triumph. There were no shouts of joy, no backslapping. Just the soft sounds of closing up, the steady beep of the monitor, and the profound, silent understanding that had passed between every person in that room. A child's life had been saved, not by the gleaming technology or the hallowed hierarchy, but by the quiet audacity and unmatched skill of a nurse who dared to see beyond the impossible. Xiomara, for the first time in her Olympus career, felt truly seen, truly valued. Not for her title, but for her hands, her mind, and the unwavering courage that had guided them. The catharsis was immense, washing over them all like a cleansing wave. The sterile air of the operating room, previously charged with a terror so profound it had been a physical weight, now vibrated with an almost religious stillness. Kai's heart monitor continued its steady, reassuring rhythm, a counterpoint to the quiet reverence that had settled over the room. No one moved. They simply watched Xiomara, whose hands, still in surgical gloves, rested lightly on Kai's chest, as if she were still willing life into him. The catharsis was a shared breath, a collective release that left everyone slightly breathless. Dr. Sarkisian, usually a towering figure of absolute control, seemed to have shrunk a few inches. His face, etched with a mixture of disbelief and awe, was stripped of its usual arrogance. He stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate, as if unsure his legs would hold him. His gaze met Xiomara's, and for the first time, she saw a raw vulnerability in his eyes. There was no anger, no condescension, only profound humility. "Nurse Reyes," he began, his voice rough, barely above a whisper, I was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong." He didn't look away, his gaze unflinching in its admission. "What you did in there, it wasn't just exceptional. It was a miracle. A testament to a skill I failed to comprehend, a wisdom I arrogantly dismissed." He paused, gathering himself. "Olympus Medical cannot afford to lose someone of your caliber. Your termination, it's rescinded, effective immediately. And let it be known, you have my deepest, unreserved apology, and my profound respect." He extended a hand, not for a handshake, but as an open gesture of supplication. It was an apology not just of words, but of spirit, a complete surrender of his former stance. Xiomara, still absorbing the weight of the moment, met his gaze. Her face remained composed, a faint flush the only betraying sign of her inner turmoil. She didn't gloat, didn't even smile in triumph. Her humility was innate, not an act. "I just saw a different way, doctor," she said softly, her voice steady. "A chance to help Kai." Dr. Moyo, who had been standing a step behind Sarkisian, now moved to Xiomara's side. Her initial dismissiveness had long since crumbled, replaced by an intense, almost worshipful admiration during the procedure. "Xiomara," she said, her voice husky with emotion, using her first name for the first time. "That was, truly beyond anything I've ever witnessed. The precision, the calm under pressure. I've worked alongside many brilliant surgeons, but what you did today, it was in a class of its own. I learned more watching you today than I have in years of residency." Her words were a genuine outpouring, devoid of any competitive edge, a sincere tribute from one dedicated medical professional to another. She reached out and squeezed Xiomara's arm gently, a gesture of newfound camaraderie and respect. The transformation in the OR was palpable. The other surgical staff, no longer merely observers, now looked at Xiomara with a mixture of awe and profound gratitude. The quiet rookie who had been dismissed and humiliated was now recognized as the unparalleled expert who had saved a child's life when all others had failed. Sarkisian, still reeling from his profound misjudgment, pressed gently. "Nurse Reyes, if you don't mind me asking, where did you hone such unconventional expertise?" It was a question born of genuine curiosity, a desire to understand the depth of her unique abilities. Xiomara finally allowed a small, almost wistful smile to grace her lips. "I trained in places where standard procedure wasn't always an option, Dr. Sarkisian," she explained, her voice gaining a quiet resonance. "Crisis zones, makeshift clinics. Places where you learn to improvise, to make do with what you have. Where every second counts, and lives depend on your ability to see beyond the textbooks, to trust your instincts and your hands when there's nothing else." She paused, a flicker of distant memories in her eyes. "You learn a certain kind of empathy there, too. A deep understanding of the human body, not just from a diagram, but from the raw reality of life and death, constantly hanging in the balance. It's not just about removing a bullet, it's about understanding the story of a body, how it holds together, and how to gently coax it back to health. Her explanation wasn't a boast, but a simple, profound truth. It revealed not just her credentials, but the very crucible of her character. It painted a picture of a woman forged in fire, her expertise not born of elite institutions, but of desperate necessity and unwavering compassion. She hadn't just acquired a skill, she had become a vessel for hope in the direst circumstances. As the team began the careful process of preparing Kai for transfer to recovery, Xiomara felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her. It wasn't the thrill of victory, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in Olympus Medical. Not just for her hands, but for her heart, her resilience, and the invaluable wisdom she carried. The weight of being overlooked lifted, replaced by a sense of belonging, not as a mere employee, but as an essential, indispensable part of a team that had just witnessed a genuine miracle. Kai Hansen's recovery was a slow but steady sunrise. Days after the extraction, his young eyes fluttered open, blinking against the sterile white of the ICU. His first conscious sound was a weak whimper for his mother, followed by the gentle squeeze of her hand. Over the next few weeks, the monitors that had once shrieked alarming warnings now hummed a reassuring lullaby. He moved from the ICU to a regular room, then to physical therapy, his small frame gradually regaining strength, his laughter beginning to echo in the halls. Kai became a symbol, not just of medical triumph, but of the profound, human capacity for survival and the unexpected paths to healing. His parents, tearful with gratitude, made sure to thank every member of the team, their deepest gratitude always circling back to the quiet nurse with the steady hands. The repercussions rippled through Olympus Medical Center, fundamentally altering the landscape for those involved. Dr. Armen Sarkisian, chief of surgery, experienced perhaps the most profound transformation. The man who had been defined by his rigid adherence to protocol and unyielding authority found himself humbled, not broken. The public firing of Xiomara, once a source of professional pride in upholding order, now hung in his memory as a stark lesson in intellectual arrogance. He saw it not as a scar on his reputation, but as a necessary crucible. Sarkisian began attending interdepartmental meetings he once deemed beneath him, listening with an unfamiliar openness to junior residents, even nurses. He initiated a new, innovation forum, a weekly session where staff at all levels were encouraged to present unusual cases, unconventional solutions, or simply observations that might challenge established norms. He sought out Xiomara, not in a grand gesture, but in quiet, respectful conversations by the nurse's station, often asking her opinion on complex cases, valuing her unique perspective. He even advocated for a review of the hospital's training protocols, pushing for a more holistic approach that valued practical, adaptive skills alongside theoretical knowledge. His reputation among the staff shifted from formidable and unapproachable to respected and, surprisingly, human. He was still the chief, but he was also a leader who had learned to listen, to trust, and to grow. Dr. Thandiwe Moyo, whose ambition had initially blinded her to Xiomara's quiet competence, also found herself changed. Having been the one to plead Xiomara's case to a desperate Sarkisian, she now carried a different kind of insight. Her drive for excellence remained, but it was now tempered by a profound respect for diverse expertise. She began actively seeking out Xiomara, not just for consultation on complex GSWs, but for her general observations, her calm demeanor, her unconventional wisdom. Moyo became Xiomara's staunchest advocate within the physician ranks, often citing Xiomara's insights in discussions, subtly challenging the old guard who still struggled to reconcile a rookie nurse with such unparalleled skill. Her own path to becoming a top surgeon now included a recognition that true leadership lay in identifying and nurturing talent, no matter its origin. And Xiomara Reyes. She remained, in many ways, the same humble woman. Her modest appearance didn't change, nor did her quiet grace. Yet, everything else around her shifted. The weight of being overlooked at Olympus had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. She no longer had to hide her expertise, it was celebrated. Her role evolved organically. She became the hospital's unofficial consultant for delicate foreign object removals, often training other specialists in the precise techniques she'd honed in far less equipped environments. She found a deep satisfaction in mentoring junior nurses, not just in medical procedures, but in trusting their instincts, in seeing the patient beyond the charts, and in speaking up when something felt wrong. Xiomara's authentic life at Olympus was one of purpose and belonging. She didn't seek titles or accolades, but she embraced the opportunity to make a difference, to bring her unique blend of crisis zone ingenuity and profound empathy to an elite setting. The hospital hierarchy, while not entirely dismantled, subtly softened. There was a palpable shift towards valuing practical intuition, collaborative problem-solving, and the recognition that genuine expertise often blossoms in unexpected places, unconstrained by traditional academic pedigrees. The story of Kai's bullet and Xiomara's hands became a legend whispered through the hospital corridors. It was a story of hope, demonstrating that even in the most rigid of systems, human growth is always possible. It affirmed that true leadership isn't about maintaining control, but about having the courage to set aside pride and embrace the unconventional when lives hang in the balance. It was a testament to the fact that expertise, forged in the fires of necessity and compassion, transcends titles and uniforms, ultimately proving that the most profound transformations often begin with the quietest voices, daring to speak a truth that changes everything. Xiomara, now truly seen, continued her work, a quiet force reminding Olympus Medical, and herself, that the greatest healing often comes not just from advanced technology, but from the extraordinary touch of a human hand. Xiomara's remarkable journey reminds us that true genius often blossoms in the most unexpected places, proving that compassion and quiet confidence can transform not just lives, but entire systems. What aspect of her story resonated most deeply with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this tale of courage and the power of the human touch inspired you, we warmly invite you to subscribe and become a cherished part of our growing global community. Your support truly helps us create more meaningful and inspiring stories like this. Thank you for watching, for believing in the extraordinary, and for being on this journey with us.